This podcast series is supported by members at Patreon. If you want to support this podcast series, head to patreon.com/Cascadian beer. With such a variety of styles in craft beer, it can be easy to forget their origins and the history around them. Welcome to the Cascadian Beer Podcast. My name is Aaron, and I'm a Cascadian. I have a background in radio and television broadcasting. I'm a music producer, and I have a passion for beer. I don't consider myself an expert in beer by any means, but I do enjoy and respect the craft and the passion of these brewmasters. I want to learn from these pioneers on what sets them apart from the rest, and why they choose to call Cascadia their home. Cascadia is a bioregion in the Pacific Northwest on the North American continent. It is made up of the U.S. states of Washington and Oregon, as well as the Canadian province of British Columbia. In this podcast series, I'll be profiling the unique breweries of Cascadia, a region that has a strong presence on the international beer scene. Today I'm profiling a festival that showcases farmhouse-style craft beers to Vancouver, BC. In other areas of Cascadia, these styles are pretty well known, but in British Columbia, that isn't always the case. Farmhouse Fest is a relatively new beer festival, held at a unique location which focuses on these more traditional styles of craft beer.
Hi, I'm Dave Shea. I'm one of the founders and organizers of Farmhouse Fest.
And what is Farmhouse Fest?
Farmhouse Fest is an annual festival of saisons and wild ales. So that's anything funky, anything sour, anything with a little bit of an edge to it.
And then why did you decide to start this festival?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Beer festivals in Vancouver have traditionally been a lot more focused on just basically getting everybody together and pouring any beer that's available. There hasn't been a lot of editorial control. There hasn't been a lot of discretion and selection, we'll say. We've looked abroad. We've been to festivals outside of Canada, and we've been to, Portland a lot. We've seen how it works in other places, and we've seen that festivals can be something different. With a little bit of focus, with a little bit of clarity in vision and in purpose, you can actually have a really interesting event that just revolves around a very specific beer style or range of styles, and it tends to bring together like-minded people who really appreciate that particular beer style.
And you said we. Who is we?
Farmhouse Fest this year is three primary organizers. It's myself, it's Jonathan Evans, and it's Matt Kump. We've worked with other organizers in the past, and we'll continue to kind of bring in people as necessary. This year we've got a few kind of key staff members, people that we're bringing in and actually paying to run specific roles. This year we're bringing in Jeremy Noonan and Alex Berner to help us manage the event, manage the bar, and just make sure things run smoothly.
Cool. And how long has this festival been running for?
This year's our third year. So we started out in 2015, and I don't see any reason why we'd stop.
And it's at a very unique location too. Why did you pick the UBC farm?
Yeah, there's not a lot of actual farmland available in Metro Vancouver. To get that, you need to travel out to the suburbs. And of course, your transportation options dwindle pretty rapidly. And with a beer festival, you definitely want convenient access to transportation. So that was kind of a primary concern. We looked around. We looked at spaces that would be amenable to a festival that had that farm theme to it. And really, UBC was the only place where we found a workable area that had, both an active farm with a actually gorgeous natural setting, and was conveniently, or at least somewhat close to major transportation routes.
And it's interesting that you are focusing on wild ales and sours and lambics, because here in the Pacific Northwest, it's kind of traditionally been the lager, the pale ale,
right,
the IPA. Do you actually see a bit of an uptake in the style that you're trying to focus on with the festival?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say that we're going to take credit for all of this, but one of the primary purposes of doing this festival was to provide a space for people to experiment and try new things, and not be afraid of putting something out there and having people reject it because they didn't get it. So just by creating that space, I think we've actually encouraged that experimentation, which really was one of the main reasons why we started this in the first place.
Because beer isn't a pale ale, it isn't an IPA, it is a variety of styles.
Yeah, beer is a list of ingredients that you can interpret and remix in many, many creative ways, and limiting yourself to just hops or just malt is, I think, a little bit short-sighted.
Yeah, because some of the breweries that you're featuring, they don't even put hops in their beer at all. It's just herbs and spices and whatever's in season.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, in some senses, we're stretching the definition of beer, I suppose. But, I mean, in other senses, this is like how beer originated, going back hundreds, if not thousands of years. Mm-hmm. Beer never was a hop-forward beverage until sometime in the 12th century, when hops were discovered for their, bittering and flavorful characteristics. Up to that point, it was a lot more, herbal and spices and things were used to balance out that malty sweetness. So I'm not going to say that we're returning to an age-old tradition or anything, because they can be a bit of a hit or miss proposition once you actually reduce or remove the hops entirely. But it is just very interesting to see that wide range available for a creative brewer to try and interpret things and create their own unique beverages.
And so how many breweries are participating?
Oh, God, that's a really good question. So this year we've got 19 local BC breweries. We're dealing with 5 local importers who are bringing us a bunch of stuff from out of the country. And the total count is 58 breweries and cideries. And
so you talk about out of the country. Is that just Washington and Oregon, or there are some other states involved as well?
No, we've got California. We've got Colorado. We've got West Beer representing the European, actually Copper and Theory and West Beer representing the European market, with Belgium coming in strong. We've got some Tuol or Toul. I'm never actually sure how you pronounce that one. They're out of Denmark. We've got, probably a handful of countries in Europe represented in the lineup this year.
And some of these beers you can't really get during the year, right? So it isn't really exclusive, but it's hard to get on a regular basis here in BC, right?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, a good example is something like a keg of Cantillon Goose. That's not something that you're necessarily going to see crop up at your local pub, because it's such a high demand beer. And because we run an event that actually lends itself to pouring something like that, we do manage to get the orders happening and kind of like coordinated in time so that we can have these special kind of like, maybe not like completely exclusive, but they're less available elsewhere products.
So the third year in operation, seeing the number of breweries that have been coming to your event, do you see kind of general patterns between what the BC breweries do together compared to what the Oregon breweries do, or is everybody just kind of doing their own thing and there isn't a general theme to their farmhouse style?
I would say that was maybe like the way it started in the first year. So, the proposition of the festival is that we're asking people to produce stuff that might be outside of their regular wheelhouse. And of course, we've seen a lot of local breweries step up and start producing more and more of that in their core lineup and their core offerings. And they're not necessarily using the festival as an excuse to experiment, which is fantastic. And we love that. But we also do provide a space for local breweries to be able to try a one-off, give us a keg of something that they just brewed on their pilot system, a small run of bottles or something. So we'll get some exclusive beers from the locals, but was there a rhyme or reason behind what they were brewing? A lot of it was just simply, this is something that we're interested in making. Let's try it. Let's see how it works out. What we've seen happen over the last couple of years, this year especially, is that there's a lot more cross-pollination happening. And I would say this is all the way up and down the West Coast. Even a little bit of European collaboration happening where, our breweries will go elsewhere and they'll do collaborations with breweries abroad, or those breweries will come to BC and they'll do collaborations. And this year, I wouldn't be able to list the number of beers we're seeing as collaborations off the top of my head, but I would say it's probably in the 10 to 20 range of like breweries who are there, who are coming from different geographical regions at Farmhouse Fest with a beer they brewed together months ago. And that's a really cool thing to see.
Yeah, so you can only get it there.
So, some of them, yeah.
It's a reason to go in itself.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what is the attendance there?
We've been testing kind of the limits of the field. So the very first year we had 800 people, and we felt it was just an amazing amount of space to stretch out, put down a blanket, play a game of beanbag toss or whatever else. And we also feel that the field is large enough that it can accommodate more. So we've been creeping that number upward. This year we're shooting for 1,300. So it's, I feel like this might be the high water mark, and we wouldn't get any bigger. Because one thing that we really don't like is going to festivals and it's, elbow room only, and you're, stuck in a crowd. You're waiting in large lines to get access to beer.
Because me personally, if it's 7 deep on the line, I don't really.
You just go and find something else to drink. Yeah. We've been festival goers. We don't want to recreate that really miserable festival experience that we've seen elsewhere. We want something that's very respective of people who are attending and giving them the best experience possible, giving them the space and kind of the flexibility to sit under a tent if the sun's too hot or it rains, God forbid, or spread out a blanket on the field. So we feel like we've got the right balance. And that's why I say, I don't think we're going to go any higher than 1,300. I think that's like our upper limit for that space. It feels like that's the right fit between the amount of booths we're juggling, the tents we're putting down, and still having a good amount of open space for people to spread out. Something new that we're trying this year is we've got an early entry where people had access to a limited number of tickets, and they would be able to buy for just a slightly increased premium and an extra couple drink tickets. You can come in an hour early and start your day and get early access to some of the things that we're pouring. So that was a very limited amount of tickets that sold out, but the general pool is I think about 900 tickets in total, and we still have a few hundred of those left, so there's still time.
And what is your favorite style out of the farmhouse styles to consume?
I am particularly partial to Brett Saisons, and that's something that I feel like we underrepresent year after year. People just aren't making them to the level that I want. So anytime I see a brewery step up and propose that as one of the beers I want to bring, I'm all for it.
And what is some good tips to make the day as best as it can at the festival? What would be something that you would tell somebody to bring, to be prepared for, to enjoy the day?
Well, let's be honest, it's Vancouver. Prepare for any kind of weather. The first year we had blazing sun. It hit 30 degrees that day. So, I would have said bring plenty of sunscreen, bring a hat. The second year it was raining and pretty miserable the whole time, but people had fun despite that. In fact, we had so many people come to us and say, we preferred the rain over the sun because we got to huddle around under the tent, and, it was a lot more of a community feel. You got to talk to your neighbor, and the rain didn't dampen anybody's spirits. This year we're shooting for somewhere in the middle. We don't control the weather. We hope for the best. I'm hoping it's going to be a pleasant 23 degrees with a partial cloud coverage that kind of comes and goes throughout the day. That would be all I ask for. So, if the gods are smiling on us, we'll get something like that.
All right. Well, really looking forward to the festival. Where can people go to find out more information and get some of those tickets that remain?
You can find us on all the social media channels at Farmhouse Fest usually works. And of course, our website, farmhousefest.com.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much to Dave for taking some time to talk to me about Farmhouse Fest. And I'll be there July 8th. And there'll actually be an update to this episode too. So be sure to check back at cascadian.beer. If you enjoyed this podcast episode and you want to help support it, you can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. It really helps us promote this podcast and get it into as many ears as possible. This is also an independently produced podcast series, and you can support it on Patreon by going to patreon.com/Cascadian Beer. We're on the majority of the social media channels, so you can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cascadian Beer or Twitter at Cascadian Beer. Thank you so much again for listening. And for more info and to follow this podcast series, head to the website, cascadian.beer. Until next time, remember, support your local.